Today's scripture is Genesis chapter 38, verses 1 through 26. This passage talks about Judah, the fourth of the 12 sons of Jacob. I'm reading from the New International Version. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law, to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, "He may die too, just like his brothers." So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shelah was now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, 'There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here.'" Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. The word of the Lord.
Can I use one of these stands here? No problem. Good morning. My name is Gareth Brandt. My home church is Emmanuel Mennonite Church in Abbotsford, and it's my privilege to be with you for 2 Sundays during Winston's visit to his family. If you're like me, you have a hard time watching the news of late. As powerful men who are in charge of the world silence marginalized voices. If you want to put that title slide up again, I chose this title for this 2-part series because in both stories, the main characters from our modern perspective are faced with a moral dilemma where they will be damned if they do and damned if they don't. But as I said last week, our modern moral dilemmas should not determine how we read the Bible. And the sexual acts in these stories are not really the main point. So I'd like to, before we get into chapter 38, review the theme of the entire story from chapter 37 to 50. And the theme here is that God's presence is with Joseph, a slave in a foreign country. Why does God's presence matter? Because God wants to save the family of Joseph. Why is God interested in Joseph's family? Because God has chosen this family through whom all nations will be blessed, as we read in Genesis chapter 12. Thus, God's universal blessing of shalom is dependent on the continuation of this family line. This is still important in the story before us today in Genesis chapter 38. Even though Joseph is not the main character, it kind of is an odd chapter in chapter 37 to 50 because he is not the main character. He doesn't even appear in this story. In the previous episode, the presence of Yahweh, the God of Israel, was integral to the plot toward shalom and blessing for Joseph. In today's story, Yahweh's presence is more in the background. And when Yahweh is directly involved in chapter 38, it's in a very harshly negative way, as we will come to see. I'd also like to review again what chapters 38 and 39 have in common. We have 2 brothers, Joseph, who are away from home. Joseph, because of forced slavery, and in today's story, Judah is away from home because of voluntary and natural emigration. In the previous episode, clothing was evidence for the damning of the main character. In this episode, clothing is evidence of exonerating the main character in the story. Sexuality and sexual acts are part of the plot of both stories, and we noted in the previous story that it was really about power rather than about sexuality, and the same theme will be true again today. We also noted that both main characters are outsiders. Joseph, because he was sold into slavery in a foreign country, and today Tamar is an outsider because she was a Canaanite, a woman, and a widow. All 3 together make her a very vulnerable person. Now, the story from chapter 38 is hard to understand. If you can put up the next title slide here. Because our world is so different. And so we need to understand the background to this story because it is so different from our own culture. It takes place in a patriarchal society. It was the world of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their wives barely get mentioned. In those days, women were the property of men. In fact, Abraham lied about his wife Sarah and gave her to Pharaoh as a sexual partner to buy his own safety. In those days, the primary purpose for women was to bear children and to carry on the family name. When they were unable to give a male heir, men brought in alternative vessels. It's basically what they were. Thus, Abraham brought in the sex slave, Hagar, because Sarah was not giving him a son. And Isaac sent a servant to get an in-house wife for him so the bloodline would remain pure. Jacob, Joseph's dad, had 4 sexual partners who bore him children. The only reason Joseph gets mentioned is because he's the oldest son of Jacob's favorite partner. This culture is not like our culture. And we have read the Bible for years and just kind of read it. And if you really think of it, wow. But a bit of Canadian trivia from history to demonstrate that maybe we are actually not that far removed. Did you know that women were not even considered persons in Canada until 1929? Thank you, Nellie McClung. No matter how progressive we think of ourselves, we still live in a patriarchal society. Of the 27 churches in Mennonite Church, British Columbia, do you know how many lead pastors are women? It's a rhetorical question. To help us to realize that perhaps we have not yet arrived. Let's return to the background of Genesis chapter 38. In a patriarchal culture, as I said, eldest sons are at the top of the value hierarchy. I would have been lucky. I'm the oldest son of my parents. Behind the plot of the story in Genesis 38, there is an important law that states, if you want to check it out, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 and 6, this law states that if an oldest son dies without a male heir, his younger brother is to have sex with his widow to carry on the oldest son's name. That was the law. It may be objectionable to us, but this was the law in a patriarchal culture. And it is also the key to understanding what takes place in Genesis chapter 38. We need to understand that law to understand the story. So let's dive into part 2. Tamar, a feminist foremother, speaks up. First of all, something a little bit odd, in that the male lead character in the story is Judah, who is the 4th son of Jacob. There's nothing special about the 4th son. I'll just leave that bit of trivia alone, but it's just a bit odd. Suffice it to say that Judah has abandoned the practice of his grandfather to choose a wife from within his own people, because he moves away from his family and marries a local girl, a Canaanite. And we don't even know her name. it's property, so names aren't that important. Just we know her father's name, Shua. Judah's wife bears Judah 3 sons. All is good so far in the story. Judah gets a wife named Tamar for his oldest son, And here is the first of 2 appearances of Yahweh, Israel's God. Yahweh kills for an unspecified wickedness of some kind. So he dies without a male heir. Then this law kicks in. Judah asks his second son, Onan, to have sex with Tamar to produce an heir for the oldest son. There's no consideration at all for Tamar. She has no choice in the matter. It's all about getting a male heir. And in a patriarchal culture, a woman's well-being, her security, is dependent on a relationship to a male. If we go a little bit further in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 7 to 10, the law does give the woman the right to complain if the younger brother refuses. And we read what the second son, Onan, agrees to have sex with her, but then gets around it because he didn't like his older brother by practicing premature withdrawal to prevent impregnation. And for this specified wickedness of refusing to honor his older brother, Yahweh kills Onan as well. God's involvement is not noted elsewhere. It's just kind of in the background for the rest of the story. Legally, Judah is now obligated to order his third son to fulfill the responsibilities of the law. But it seems the third son, Shelah, is still underage. And Judah is worried, and for understandable reasons, about losing his last remaining son. So out of concern for himself, Judah deprives Tamar of the one chance she has of fulfilling her role to provide a male heir. And so he sends her back to her father as a childless widow. The trail of death continues as Judah's wife dies. Time passes, Shelah grows up, the third son, but Judah had still not given Tamar to him as a wife to continue the family line as the law required. Remember, God's blessing on all nations was to come through this family line. So this is when Tamar takes matters into her own hands, in a way that neither the law nor the custom would approve of. But the motive is right: to honor her late husband by continuing the family line. She hears of Judah's journey to shear sheep and dresses up as a prostitute and sits at the city gate to wait for him. Judah, after the prescribed period of mourning his wife is over, decides to engage the services of a prostitute that, unbeknownst to him, happens to be his disguised daughter-in-law. Well, they haggle about a price for sexual services, and just to make sure he pays up, she demands some personal items as collateral. His sash or rope that he holds his clothes up, as well as his seal, or it could have been a signet ring, and his staff. These become the collateral to make sure that she gets the goat. Later on, when Judah sends the agreed upon price, which is the young goat, and wants his personal items back, no prostitute can be found, because Tamar has taken off her disguise and has gone back to her father's house as the young widow that she was. She needs a man for her own security and protection, and that was all she could get. Nobody knows about any prostitute in the area. Judah does not want to investigate any further because he might become the laughing stock of the town if he is found out frequenting prostitutes. So he drops the case. Tamar, if you read verse 27, gives birth to not one male heir, but two twin sons to carry on the family line. Surely this is a double blessing from God, a reward for her loyalty, creativity, and ingenuity. It would be nice if this were the end of the story, but the ending is a bit messier than that. When Tamar is 3 months pregnant and beginning to show, Judah is told that his daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution and as a result is pregnant. Well, he's furious and demands that she be burned alive in a public square. A few things to note here. There's no trial, and Judah seems to make the call that she's guilty without consulting anyone else. And actually, since he had sent her back to her father, Tamar is no longer his property, but her father's. Judah has no jurisdiction in this case. And Judah makes no attempt to locate who the impregnator was, even though that was part of the Levitical law, that he should find out who the guilty party is. He doesn't necessarily know that. And of course, it takes two to get pregnant. And if we look at another Levitical law in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 12, both the impregnator and the prostitute are to be executed. And if you look at another law in Leviticus chapter 21, verse 9, public burning, what he was asking for Tamar, was beyond the law and was reserved only for daughters of priests who had prostituted themselves. Who does Judah think he is? And it all sets us up for the shocking punchline. Tamar's brilliant plan prevented the worst from happening. She holds up Judah's personal items and says, "The one who owns these items is the man who impregnated me." Gotcha. Judah would be indicting himself if he pursued the case, so he relents and says, Tamar has acted more righteously than me. He realized his mistake and confessed. She was doing what he should have done to continue the family line. She took up his responsibility. So, what can we learn from this story for today? It's so far removed from us in many ways. But firstly, we must state the obvious. Not all stories in the Bible are meant to be prescriptive for us. This story is descriptive of a patriarchal system that is surely oppressive and sinful, to say the least. It does not promote the shalom and well-being for all that we believe is central to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yet it seems somehow that God accomplishes the divine purposes even in the midst of evil systems. And for that, we are thankful in our own day. Secondly, it's important to state that Tamar is the undisputed hero of this story. The narrator of the story knows that her act is a brave one, and that an act that promotes God's purposes. She had been denied both dignity and justice. There's nothing in the patriarchal system that would give this to her. So she takes it into her own hands, and God blesses her for it. Tamar claims the self-worth and self-determination that the systems denied her. And we continue to be plagued by very similar systems. Tamar's act is not unlike our present movements for social, racial, and sexual equality. Tamar claims the dignity and justice that all people deserve. If the systems do not allow for it, then it must be claimed in subversive and unconventional ways, as she did. Judah recognizes it, God rewards it. Tamar, the feminist foremother, is speaking up. Recall the main point of the Joseph narrative: the preservation of Abraham's family so that through them blessing might come to all people. Tamar is part of the same story. And thank you for mentioning the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. She is listed in the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. Tamar is speaking up. Her voice echoes 1,000 years. And of course, this is consistent with the way that the God of the Bible works in other situations. Another Canaanite prostitute, Rahab, also becomes part of the people of God. She is the ancestor of Boaz, who marries another foreigner, Ruth, who also uses some subversive tactics to become part of the ancestry of David and ultimately the Messiah. And Bathsheba is mentioned, whom David rapes. And she becomes part of the genealogy. Tamar's voice is echoing forward. Yahweh is a God who speaks up through marginalized people like Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba, all feminist foremothers. Are we listening? Feminism is not only about the amplification of female voices, but the voices of other marginalized people. Indigenous, black, colored, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, neurodivergent, differently abled. Tamar, the feminist foremother, speaks up for all marginalized people. Tamar is speaking up. Are we listening?